For the Los Angeles Review of Books, I'm Colin Marshall, coming to you from LARB HQ in Silver Lake, Los Angeles, California, sitting down today with Marc Maron, comedian, podcaster, writer, conversationalist, now television star. You'll know him from his comedy and his podcast, WTF, but also his new show on the independent film channel, Maron, and his new book, Attempting Normal. Marc, in this book, there's a theme that comes up so many times, and I've got to call this out first. It's the theme of self-avoidance. What to you does it mean to avoid yourself?
Well, there's a lot of things you can do to keep yourself distracted, certainly. I mean, avoiding yourself also requires some work and effort and focus. But in terms of whatever you're doing to relieve whatever your anxiety or particular fear or pain or mental processes is, that's sort of what I would call avoiding yourself. There's a way of processing feelings that don't require the eating of ice cream or the sexualizing of things or the whatever you're compulsively or obsessively involved with. That's some sort of way of self-medicating.
What do you think of as a classic self-avoidance mechanism for yourself or for anybody else? What do you think of when you think of how to get away from yourself, how people do it?
Well, I always do it. Most of them can cause shame, which is always fun. So then you have to, once you get done avoiding yourself, you can feel ashamed for yourself and then beat yourself up about it. So it becomes a circle. A lot of things. I mean, you can eat your feelings. You can, sex away your feelings. You can, I tend to drink a lot of coffee or even, I think some feelings happen that aren't really feelings. They're actually masking feelings, raging or just, even, watching television, certain types of reading. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it. I'm pretty good at distracting myself.
A lot of the text here in the book is about your own self-distraction, self-avoidance. But I mean, no one has ever escaped that, right? We're all doing it.
I think so. It's not really my specialty and I'm not a psychotherapist, but I think that, what I'm recognizing in the book is that oddly, even with all my self-avoiding, that, I'm completely consumed with myself. And so the action of self-avoiding becomes sort of a narrative. But I don't know. And no one's ever really come at me with that angle before. But I think that using other people is another way we can avoid ourselves. But
everything is a possible tool for self-avoidance.
Well, I think so. But I think there's something about there are good things. Being selfless, if possible, is a good thing. And sometimes self-avoidance, it could be very beneficial. But I just think that what more of the book is about is why do I feel aggravated, incomplete? What are these compulsions and these journeys to sort of complete myself, I think is more the journey. I think that self-avoidance, once you call that what it is, you can sort of take steps to be more aware and stop it. But feeling like you don't feel whole, I don't know. I think that you might do the similar things, but it's not for the same reason.
Doing your podcast as well as writing a book like this, do you consider both of those things? I mean, I think of them as you starkly looking yourself in the eye. Do you think of both projects in those media or anything you do in any medium as that?
Well, I think there's a certain level of honesty that people avoid, probably for good reason, publicly, is that, they can cause you pain, they can cause others pain, they can make you vulnerable. So I think that the attempt in sort of picking through my past and picking through my family a little bit. I think I was always on a quest for, authenticity, for, being true to myself and figuring out what that was. So I think the book is really about confronting certain things that I've done. If you're honest on the page and you're honest with your listeners, it kind of pushes you out there. You're sort of giving yourself no choice, but to be seen. And I think a lot of my journey has been to sort of, say I'm here and that I'm doing this thing and I want you to like it, or I don't, or I want you to at least have a reaction to it. It's just pushing myself out into the world, pushing myself, out of my head and into life. And self-avoidance, getting back to that, I guess I'm trying to figure out in my mind, when you bring that up now, because I don't know how much of the book is really about that as it is about sort of trying to, push myself out into the world, and also, saying and doing things that are bad and stupid and, and hurt people. These are the realities of life. I mean, you can't pretend that you're not guilty of it. So I think that, putting it out there, it's got its liabilities, but I think that's all I was ever looking for is to sort of be, fully me. And the way I do it, I don't recommend it, to anybody, but it's certainly raw. But I don't like, and obviously we can't avoid some sort of, what would you call it? That you can't be 100%. You can't walk around like an open wound, and I know that. But you have to do that for a little while to at least know how to, what you're trying to. Keep in and how to sort of regulate how you are and behave in the world.
This phrase you use, this notion of not giving yourself a choice, that is a line. It was one of my favorite lines I've heard on your podcast, WTF, a conversation with Conan O'Brien, where he says, you ask him how he achieved what he has. He says, I didn't give myself a choice. You call that line out in your book as well. How do you interpret that line, not giving yourself a choice?
Well, look, fear is going to drive people a lot of different directions, usually away from something. I mean, usually I think that fear, either you're going to fight or you're going to flight. So, and I think that's another way of fighting. It's how I do most of my writing on stage, is that you sort of corner yourself. Even when I started the podcast, everything had broken down on me, and I didn't have many possibilities. So it was either fight or flight, and flight being, end your own life or whatever the hell it's going to be. But I think that not giving yourself a choice is not always a choice. I think that you find yourself in certain life situations where, either you're just going to fall into yourself and feel sorry for yourself or kind of just fade away, emotionally or psychologically, or you're just going to find the will within you to kind of keep pushing forward. And I think that's really what he's saying, is that, there is no other way. When you get to a certain age, there's no plan Bs anymore. There's no sort of like, well, I could always what could you always do? What are your options? Who do you think you are? You're not in college. You're not prepared to do anything. You don't have many choices.
Was there ever a plan B, really?
No. I mean, you sort of like, I think I'm a smart guy. I think I probably could have pursued, some sort of teaching degree, or perhaps, gone to more school or took it seriously. You can always look, people change their lives all the time, and certainly what I'm saying is sort of dramatic. But that's how I am. There's a drama to it. It's like, what else will I do? Well, I mean, if you have to survive, you'll figure something out. But do you just want to do something to survive? Fortunately, I've whatever the fight I've fought, and there's been a lot of difficult times. But I've just pushed on with whatever it is that I do. There was never really a plan B. I mean, if there was, it was always something, mundane, like cooking in a restaurant or something.
People reading your book will learn the origin story of your podcast, WTF. It sounds like the moment you created the podcast was your bleakest point. Would you say literally that? It sounds that way, but would you commit to that was the bleakest time I've ever had?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, the starting with the crumbling of the marriage, and on into the sort of reality of that certain things happen in your life where you can't really hide or pretend or sort of remain committed to the delusion that you're honoring. Because something doesn't work out. You have these moments in life when you realize, I don't have any control over anything, and whatever I'm hanging on to might be ridiculous. So, when the marriage, when she left, then I was left with this. I had no idea that was going to happen, and I was, shattered, and just didn't ever think that would happen. It's ridiculous. Why wouldn't you think that? But when it becomes a reality, and when you get brokenhearted, you're in sort of a different world. Your perception of life becomes very, sort of dark and cynical. And I was already cynical, which is one of the reasons why I think the marriage ended. But so then when you're humbled like that, that's a very vulnerable place. And you realize, like, well, who is going to help me? There's those moments where, you need help, you wonder, why going to have to help myself? I mean, your parents aren't going to come pick you up. That's over.
Yes.
And it was bleak because I had to acknowledge that my career was not really going anywhere, and that, my marriage was over, and that, what I wanted to do my whole life and what I had been doing was okay. I'm still doing it, but having been in comedy a long time, I see people fall away or disappear or get their spirit broken. So in that way, it was the darkest time, and the choice to just try this thing without any expectation, just knowing like, well, this seems, guys are doing this podcast thing. So my buddy who was the original producer of the show was, I said, well, can you figure it out? I know I can talk. Can you figure out the rest of this? Put it up, and, what do we got to do? And that was really it. I knew I wanted to stay vital on some level and continue putting myself out there, but I didn't have any expectation or plan. But yeah, it was birthed out of complete desperation and just the desire to continue working somehow and not disappearing.
Before WTF, the podcast, and before the Marc Maron Renaissance, I think to myself, about the shape of your career in comedy, and it seems to me that in the 80s or 90s, I mean, there were a lot of mediocre comics who sort of took the slant. I'm honest, and I'm going to bitch and moan, and you got unfairly lumped in with them in some part of the zeitgeist of the comics that didn't have much but complaining. They said, "Oh, Marc Maron, he's complaining, right?" And you just got put there with those guys who didn't go anywhere. Do you think that's at all accurate, my view of that?
Well, I'm not sure what you're referring to, but I mean, alternative comedy was seen as somewhat self-indulgent. In terms of complaining, I mean, there's an argument to be made that most point of view comics are complaining. Really, I mean, self-deprecation and complaining are relatively similar.
Important line, though. Wouldn't you say?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know who a complainer is. I mean, is Lewis Black a complainer? Is Richard Lewis a complainer? Was George Carlin complaining? Is Louis complaining? I don't know. What's the line?
There's higher complaining and there's lower complaining,
but it's
perhaps
all complaining. So the idea of complaint or of righteous anger or of isn't life tough? Whatever it is, I mean, that the underdog as comedic archetype is well established. So I think that, if anything, I was lumped in with alternative comedy early on, and that seemed very nebulous to people. But I was always a club comic, and alternative comedy in the 80s, or actually the 90s is when it really started to happen. Was really for me just another outlet, and now, sort of a world has been built around that where, non-traditional venues, are places to do comedy now. It's a longer discussion that's not necessary. But the idea, I think I was angry. And I think that, I was sort of anger driven, somewhat political, but also a bit shocking. I think I come from a tradition at that time of what I would thought was, aggressive social satire or sort of swaggering anger that was never mainstream and never really for everybody. There's very few guys that do that well or do it in a way that sustains them. There's a lot of people that are cranky. Cranky's much different.
Yes, that's true. There's many shades here to name.
Sure, yeah, but the crank is a great comedic persona, and there's very few guys that do that well. It's a natural disposition. I think I've been called cantankerous, which is a broader cranky. I think cantankerous leaves room for off-putting. And as I get older, I think I'm fortunate in that somehow or another I'm almost 50, yet I have, just now started to build an audience of, a very wide variety of ages of people. So I do get a certain amount of respect as, perhaps an old professorial type or a kind of wacky, aggravated uncle. Which is good, I mean, it's no easy game to sort of come into who you are at 49 years old and start, finally, being relevant to people.
What is the sort of thing you've always been angry about from the beginning till now? What have been the consistent points of anger?
Well, I think I naturally lash out to people, at things that, seem to present themselves as a truth or as like just in general, well-adjusted people bother me.
What's a well-adjusted person?
Somebody who, kind of moves through life as if they have, no struggles or problems. There's part of me that's sort of like, oh, there's got to be one in there. I want to rile that guy up. Right. Authority bothers me, but usually I'm just aggravated because I have a certain amount of impatience, and I usually feel overwhelmed. And I think one of the reasons why I stopped doing, political punditry, or I was on I was a lefty talk show host for a couple of years, and I think I served my time in fighting the good fight. But I found that, over, 2 years of being engaged in politics, and, I was always a reactionary as a younger person. I postured without really knowing the nuances of even how, legislation works, let alone, how politics really work. Right. So I got a real education in that when I did time at Air America. And I think that, just that tone, that my, righteous anger, when sort of fueled properly, provided a lot of people a lot of relief in a fairly dark time for our country, especially for people on the left. So, I still have a lot of fans from that time who were like, you really helped us out during the Bush years, because it was a scary time. I was in a red state. I had, relatives, I didn't know we knew what was truth or wasn't truth. And even though when I did political talk radio, I talked a lot about my cats and food and other problems, I was driving a show that, that's mind was and heart was in the right place ideologically for what we were doing. And we did a lot of original comedy, and I think we provide a lot of relief. But when I got done with that, I realized, when I started the podcast, that I didn't want to continue in politics because it wasn't my passion. I'd become disillusioned. When you really get when you really sort of tap into and educate yourself as to how politics works and who the players are and why, it's very easy to feel disheartened and disillusioned by both sides and by the system in general. And I just couldn't commit my life to that fight because I had deeper problems. So that meant that I had to go into existential anger or existential aggravation, which is where the podcast sort of started. I made it I really wanted all the podcasts to not be hinged to pop culture or hinged to politics, but hinged to, emotion and just, basic anxiety, fear, and anger. And I found that, as time went on and I talked to more people, that, I was angry, for fairly basic psychological reasons. I had anxiety, and, I felt a little jilted by the way I was brought up, and I was emotionally crippled in certain ways in relationships, and I can track those things. But I just found that there was a lot to resolve within me. And I could use politics as a template to sort of push anger through. I could, my anger was adaptable. Right. It's like, I've got the engine going.
Points anywhere.
Sure, exactly. So, how do you control that? How do you, get some distance from it? How do you, stop it, some of it?
Talking on stage, talking on the radio on Air America, then talking on a podcast, making all your own choices. What was the feeling of talking in that third new way when you began?
Well, at Air America, I was always up against the agenda of the network in the way that I felt that, comedy can't be that partisan. And, we have to, in order to do effective satire, it sort of has to, you have to transgress. And also my own life and struggles became essential to me because I just got bored with politics. Yes. When you do daily talk with politics, you're in a narrative, and the narrative is decided upon. There's not a lot of new thinking going on. There's a lot of reacting to whatever the narratives are of the administration or to whatever story you're following. And that wasn't enough about me. And also, so you had the ideology, and we were up against an organization there that didn't think we were doing it right. We were doing a lot of irreverent humor, a lot of great stuff, a lot of great radio theater. We worked very hard with a lot of geniuses over there on my show on Morning's Edition, and it changed. There was nothing quite like it. I still have all that material. I don't know what to do with that. But the shift from taking the mic on my own, as a broadcaster, which, I'm very green at that. I don't consider myself a radio veteran, but I did know that my personality worked there. I mean, it worked on those kind of mics. So then I had to figure out how to sort of man a mic on my own. There was a few times at Air America where I'd had to host shows, but still you're moving towards breaks. Every segment's not going to be more than 11 or 12 minutes. And you sort of kind of compartmentalize like that. So it's sort of an illusion. You're not really talking for 3 hours. And you sort of ride it out. But once I learned how to talk out to nothing, just by myself, that was a tremendous breakthrough. It's like when you figure out how to get that third ball in the air when you're trying to juggle or when you figure something out. And there's a freedom to that. So, and also I don't have to answer to anybody. So that's different.
When did conversation become important to your podcasting life? I mean, when did conversation become essential to it? People think of WTF as about conversation, about one-on-one conversation, usually comedian on comedian. Tell me how that became the core.
Well, I think that, unbeknownst to me until I really thought about it, that I had really alienated myself from comics, from my community in a way, from people. I'd gotten to a point of cynicism that was a little unbearable. I was a bit bitter, a bit self-pitying, and sort of, too intense to really have those emotions publicly because, it's like an inverted charisma. You become sort of a negative force that people kind of deal with if they respect you enough or they're close enough to you or like-minded. And that's not always a great thing. You don't want a bunch of like-minded negative people just sitting there like some sort of energy vortex. Yeah. But I think, right at the beginning, I knew that I had to reach out to my community and to other comics to not only get content, but also to sort of connect with something I understood and knew. Right. And I think over the process of it, early on, that what really became what WTF or the podcast was known for was that, this interviewer, me, I never saw them as interviews, and I rarely prepare questions. I just need to talk about myself to famous people, I guess. So I always brought a lot of my own garbage and my own sort of issues to the forefront within conversation. So I think I was really looking for help. So I think the tone of the WTF really sort of was about me saying, like, this happens to me. I mean, do you get this? Is this happening to you? Have you been through this thing? And sort of like re-engaging with humans and re-engaging with my peers, and also learning how to listen again and have emotions about someone else's story and laugh at things. I'd really forgotten how to just open my heart and, take someone else in and provide, an empathetic ear and also just like getting entertained by all these, great entertainers. And like, that was what got me into comedy in the first place when I was a kid. Just, wow, these guys are great. I love laughing. And all that sort of started to come back, But I think it was really about the essence of conversation, the essence of spending an hour talking to somebody else's. It's really it's a service. It's a way that, people help each other. It's a way that we know we're all human. It's a beautiful thing.
There's a sense in which, just as a listener to shows yourself, any kind of show, you don't want to hear an interviewer from on high pretending that they know everything and, deigning to ask certain questions about a guest's work. You want to hear an interviewer who's a human being, right? You want to hear them bring their shit to the table, right?
I guess. I don't know.
Don't you? You specifically, when you listen to something, you want to hear that, right?
I don't know. I don't know what I respond to. I certainly like to be moved. When I think about interviewers, who are they? Who are we talking about?
Who do you listen to?
I used to listen to Brian Lehrer, at WNYC, I'd listen to Leonard Lopate in New York, but he was annoying and kind of high-minded. Yeah, really annoying. I don't know if you know him, but
heard a little bit.
Yeah, but but like the people on television, I like Letterman, but those for that type of interview, to do short form and to sort of do produced segments where the agenda is to get laughs. That's a whole other skill set, and Letterman's really the best at it. And but then when you build a relationship with a broadcaster. I grew up with Letterman, and he was my guy. And as he got older, there was vulnerabilities, but usually it's a surprise when you can identify genuine moments. I mean, he's got great timing and he's hilarious, but after his heart surgery and certain things went on with him, there was a vulnerability that started to surface that I found very compelling and endearing, and it was great that he was sort of owning it. And but in terms of long form interviews, I mean, Charlie Rose does what he does. I don't know, it's okay. I can't remember really anything. I don't sit and watch him. It's still, that's an information based podcast, or not podcast, but interview show. And I watched some of the Dick Cavett stuff, and he was great. But he was great because he was soft spoken and sort of had the wherewithal and the courage to let moments sit awkwardly if necessary. Conan is very, high strung, but that's short form. And there's not a lot of people that do long form. I mean, Terry Gross is obviously very good, but she volunteers nothing of herself. Right. But she has a tone and a sort of tenacity that's very compelling and charming and coaxing. Listen to Studs Terkel, and that was great. Studs was, he kind of had a kind of not gruff, but every guy disposition in a way, and kind of went at things as a guy who was just curious about something, and but also reverent, or reverential, is that the word? You could tell that he adored the people he was talking to a lot of times, but he was just like getting in it with somebody, and that. But I didn't look to anybody for inspiration. I didn't have a mindset. I just saw it as like, I like to talk. Let's talk to some people.
Before the advent of long-form podcasting, it seems to me the world outside of comedians, I mean, they didn't know comedians. People didn't know comics. They knew what they did. No one knew anything about comics, really, right?
I guess. I mean, there were certain public personalities that they didn't know them in the way necessarily that was in control of the comic himself. I mean, once comics started to break down, or after Richard Pryor set himself on fire, and after sort of Lenny Bruce died of a drug overdose, and people started to become more acquainted with the idea that comics were not always funny, or that had I think that's been a common, probably cultural misgiving for years, that the sad clown, the Pagliacci, and I even bought into it. It's like all the best comedy comes from misery, and I don't know if that's exactly true anymore, but yeah, I mean but show business in general, the underbelly, or the other side of show business, just dealing with these people as people. I think the advent of that becoming more known had to do with like entertainment news, and just the sort of expanding of tabloid culture. But now I think it's different. I think that with social networking and the amazing accessibility that almost everybody has to almost everybody, you find yourself putting yourself out there in a lot of different ways. But I don't know. My belief was, when I started, that comics, if they're like me, we made a tremendous sacrifice, and it took a tremendous risk with our lives to sit around and try to look at the world and take things in, and frame them in a way that people laugh at, but also sort of gives them a new point of view on something. So comics, for the most part, are they're thinkers. They're people that have a lot of time to think about things and get an angle on them. And there's very few things they can't speak to.
And the podcast specifically, I mean, it's a part of this book. The podcasting is a part of this book. It's a part of the television show as well. We see you podcasting on the show. Is there a sense in which podcasting allowed you to write this book? What the conversations you had allowed you to write what's in Attempting Normal?
Well, I mean, when I pitched the book, it allowed me in the sense, not emotionally or creatively, but certainly opportunistically.
Oh, I see. The notoriety from the podcast made this a stronger pitch.
Yeah. I mean, the pitch was the pitch. When I pitched the book, the podcast was not that relevant necessarily. It was around, but podcasting in general was still, it had not blown up. in the way that it did. But, when I started the podcast, one of the other things I did to try to get something going was, pitch an idea of a collection of memoirs to my literary agent who I hadn't talked to in years. Because I did write a book in 2001. I had a book come out. And, but that was, I got that because an editor had seen a one-man show I did. But, the dynamics of what was happening. So the book pitch was really put in place before the podcast. It really took a hold. But, we did drop the pitch on publishers, the same day or the day after a New York Times piece was published on me in the podcast. So, there was a tension. That was just, kind of a pretty good calculation on behalf of whoever. I mean, maybe I don't want to take full credit for it, but things sort of synced up. There was a synchronicity happening. A timing was happening that had never really happened in my life. Things were sort of falling into place. But the writing of the book, I think, I like to write, and I do think that I have a voice on the page. I don't really like writing that much unless I have to. Yes. And I had to. I had no real intention of doing another book, but when I got the deal, I was like, well, now I got a deadline that's hanging over me. So let's do some writing. And some of the stuff in here, I have an obsessive fan who, transcribes all of my monologues. So, there were thousands of pages of me talking about almost every aspect of my life that I was able to use as sort of an encyclopedia. So, the book is really not about podcasting other than a few chapters about my life now. But, the book is about marriage. It's about, relationships with my family. It's about guitar playing. It's about dogs. It's about buying pants. It's about, but my point of view is certainly all the way through it. Right. And the fact that I have that point of view is, I'm very happy that I've arrived at a point of view.
It's about stealing from Whole Foods, too. Yeah. How did you arrive at that act of civil disobedience?
That was actually the very first podcast that I was just in Whole Foods, and I have a resentment against them because I think they're overpriced. And I think there's some part of me that thinks that, good food should be available to everybody at a reasonable price. And also that one in Union Square, it's always got these horrible lines, and your register's up when a color changes, and it's just a very kind of mechanized rodent-like feeling to it. And I just had that stevia in my hand, and I just didn't have the patience, and it was overpriced. They didn't have it at Trader Joe's where I would go there. And I was just looking at the lines. I was looking at the stevia, and I knew how I felt about Whole Foods. And I'm like, I'm going to steal this. And I think that's okay. And I think it's a statement, that it was, I think it was a rationalization ultimately. But I did walk out with it. But I walked out holding it literally in front of me. So I could.
Nothing sneaky about this.
That's right. I'm just taking this. Right. And no one stopped me. So I was like, yeah. Screw you, Whole Foods. I won this round. And I think a few people do that.
It's one of those moments that tells you people could be getting away with more. Where society is in some sense, you don't like the way society manifests itself in Whole Foods, but it's functioning, I guess, if you can do that, and there's not a million safeguards in place against that.
Well, yeah, but that way of thinking is sort of anarchist, and also, that's why there are laws. Right. I knew I was doing something wrong. It's not right to steal, but there was something about, I just thought Whole Foods had it coming, and I think that civil disobedience in a broader sense, not in stealing from private businesses, is necessary in order to change things. I don't know that I was specifically thinking that my actions were going to change anything. I was just, stealing something from a company that, I've got problems with. But I think in court, it would be hard to frame that as an act of civil disobedience that had some social momentum behind it.
Slap on the wrist, that's fine.
Yeah, I think so. I'm willing to make up for it. I was willing to pay for it all the way out to the door, but no one stopped me. But yeah, shoplifting, I'm sure, functions in that way, no matter what it is, but it's still shoplifting, and it's against the law. And, thank God, even with the book and the podcast, I have not been arrested for my stealing of a $9 thing of stevia. And I'm not even saying that I really did it.
No, true. And whether or not you like or dislike writing for the page, not writing material, just writing text, what does doing that afford you that speaking doesn't, that podcasting doesn't. I mean, writing a book or an article must engage some part of you nothing else does.
Yeah, time to think and time to process your feelings in a different way. It's much more compartmentalized. It's much more controlled. You know, I mean, sure, you can write a script and do it, and you can read in front of people, but when you improvise comedically or just live in the moment of a performance, it's much different. You know, when you write things, the mathematics of it, you know, like with anything else that I do, creatively, there's an act of discovery. So, you know, when you start writing a piece, and then all of a sudden, you know, that next piece follows, that next sentence comes to you, that next thought, and then you put it next to the first thought, and then you kind of run with things. There's an exciting process of discovery with writing, and then unlike just talking or performing, you know, with writing, you can sit there and look at it, and then rewrite it, and then cut and paste, and then throw it away, and then, you know, say this sucks, and there's your engagement with the text can take as long as you want.
You have, in other words, more control over everything when you're writing a book. And that's the theme of this book is how much control you allow yourself or assume on your own part, right? I mean, control, one of the main themes here, no?
I don't know. You know, I mean, not unlike your observation about self-avoidance, I'm not sure that the themes of control were something I was thinking about. So, you know, if you want to flesh that out a little bit, I'll address it.
Sure. Yeah. I don't want to say you were thinking about this, Marc Maron, but
I'm interested to hear what your reading was of it, and then maybe I can speak to it a little bit.
The idea that you have gotten, the word happier is too simple, but you find life more livable when you confront what you can control, what you can. I mean, I guess that's a serenity prayer ultimately,
Sure.
isn't it? But the idea that you have been you're least happy when you have thought you can control everything. Is that
Sure.
right?
I mean, I think that, you know, that if I had more discipline or a little more distance, that, and certainly in the TV show you see this a little too, you know, that I'm a guy that, you know, that tries it his way and keeps pushing and pushing until he becomes just this comedy of errors, you know, and to somewhat of a tragic degree in the book, but comedic. But, you know, to think that, you know, to really commit to your way just by instinct or impulse or habit, and then, you know, have that way break down over and over again, you know, at some point, you know, either you're going to get the humility necessary to change or to see yourself, you know, more honestly, or you're just going to become this, you know, this horrible, you know, crazy person who just keeps repeating this thing, you know, even though it's beating the hell out of him. I think there's a lot about, like, you know, what you see here is that, you know, I think that a lot of the emotions and a lot of the things that I go through, you know, probably should have been resolved, you know, before I was 10 years old. That, you know, there was an expectation for people to take care of me no matter what. There was a defiance to it that I think is emotionally infantile. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the way I was brought up by very self-involved parents. I think what you're seeing in the book and in my life is that, you know, I finally just took the hit of like knowing that, you know, you can't always get what you want. You don't have control over most things. You know, life is disappointing. And that's it. And that, you know, you have to accept certain things the way that they are, no matter how upset it makes you. And you can sit there and stomp your feet and rage and, you know, scream and yell. But, you know, as a 45-year-old person or a 50-year-old person, you know, that's not as tolerable or even as charming as when a 5-year-old does it.
And even then, a character learning that, I mean, a man learning that, it gives you a pretty ideal character to work with for a show like Maron, right? I mean,
right. And I wish I had enough detachment to see myself as a character. That sort of hasn't happened quite thoroughly. Right. I mean, all this stuff was very urgent to me, you know, the stuff I wrote in the book. And, you know, I think if I'm on the cusp of having enough distance to see myself as a caricature. But even in the TV show, you know, I did 10 episodes. I'd never had the opportunity to act or write or do any of that stuff in television. I've had deals and whatnot. And I really didn't think any of that stuff was going to happen for me, and it did. But I think I was really just showing up and trying to honor myself as best as possible. Now, I think if we got another season and really sat down with it, and I had some conversations with people that, you know, aren't sucked into my world or who I trust to say like, well, this is the character you are, because I don't see myself that way. I don't have enough creative control or distance to say like, well, I can write from me. I still can't do that. I'd like to, but I think that's one of the reasons why I'm compelling, and also one of the reasons why I'm not more consistent is that, it's all very immediate and very life and death for me. And there's a lot of emotional risk for me in anything I do still. I still require, my needs need to be met, as opposed to, I'm going to entertain people. For some reason with me, it's sort of like, well, I need to feel good. Yes. So hopefully, we'll get another season, and, we can really say, well, look, this is why you're funny here. And I'm like, I never thought of that. So let's do more of that.
I mean, but even now, seeing the episodes of Maron produced, and I was watching a few of them myself, do you think of yourself as playing Marc Maron on the show? I mean, there were a lot of old shows, old sitcoms where comedians would play the versions of themselves with their first name but a different last name. Where are you on that spectrum between just being yourself and being Mark whomever, even though it seems like it's you? How much is it fictionalized you?
Well, it's fictionalized, and a lot of the stories had to be sort of expanded and manufactured, but, they're all based on, some events in my life. And I think I just kind of rode those out because that was the way I knew how to do things. Right. I think that, the character is obviously going to be more limited than I am. You're dealing with 22-minute episodes that have to have stories and engage with other people. But I think it's a good question to figure out, what nuances of me that I didn't really use, and and how can we use those to comedic effect? I don't know that those discussions were had because I don't know if any of us really knew exactly what that was. I mean, obviously the writers I was working with, knew my life, and I had these stories, but I've always had a fairly broad personality, and I was always a little too raw and a little too real to sort of pigeonhole. But I'm not sure that a little bit of pigeonholing wouldn't be bad. Would be bad to sort of move forward as a comedic personality. What are the things that I do naturally that are funny and moving, and how do we sort of rein those in a little bit and control them a little more?
In the first episode of Maron, you in the show noticed you're getting heckled on Twitter by the Dragon Master.
Right.
Is that, how drawn from life is that? I know that Twitter has been a source of good and bad for you. Would you call it that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm very kind of, it's the most, my relationship with Twitter is probably the second most present relationship in my life. So. Yeah, I mean, that happened. It happened in a different way. I was, being attacked on a blog and, through a weird series of investigative work, that was very much like the show. I tracked this guy down on Facebook.
What did you want to say to him?
Not sure. What I wanted to say was like, if you're going to attack me, don't use context. Don't, take apart my jokes and fragment them and, misrepresent me, and use my work to do that. But I think ultimately I was sort of like reaching out to figure out like, how can you be so mad at me? How am I being misunderstood? It was more
Why aren't you just ignoring me?
Well, not even that. Why don't you like me?
Oh, I see.
I don't want to be ignored.
Right. No one does. But I mean, there's a sense in which you could think to yourself, my work made this guy do an impassioned thing. Sure, it's attacking me on a blog.
It's a more mature thing. And a lot of, as you get older and as you get more adept at social networking and dealing with these platforms, you realize that some people just want to connect. They just want to poke you. Right. And they want to be mean, and they want to get a rise out of you. I mean, I know I can relate to that. I'm as much of a troll as anybody else in certain respects. But we live in a troll culture, which is sort of predatory. But at some point, I have to be able to say, well, this is what I do. And, Louis C.K. said to me recently in really having this discussion with him about how you react to that type of attack or any type of attack is that, he said, look, we create something and it's a one-sided conversation. You put it out there and that's your part of it. It's done. You're probably better off not, continuing or engaging in the conversation, around, the attacks. But it hasn't been that bad. But it's all very personal to me. It hurts my feelings. And again, I want to know why people don't like me. But I went back and forth with that guy for like a year.
How much humanity did you find within him by the end of that process?
He had his own problems, and he was going through a hard time. And I think that, he eventually said, look, I obviously, you represented something in myself that I was having a hard time with, and this and that. But but then it never really. He was never that contrite. I wouldn't say that he likes me still, but to have that much rage and to continue that dynamic that we were doing indicates something. I mean, I just got into something with Michael Ian Black on Twitter yesterday that all these different outlets picked up on, these content feeders.
Oh, jeez.
And for me, like Michael Ian Black and I have a contentious relationship, but we don't hate each other. But it's just the way we interact with each other. We're professional entertainers, and and it's just been this way with us for years, for like 2 decades. And we just did it on Twitter, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, what's happening?" And I was baffled by the attention that people were. Is this real? What is it? I'm like, not really. I guess it's real, but what's the big deal? And he emailed me. He's like, "What's We emailed each other. I'm like, "What's going on? What's it?" He's like, "I don't know. Just let it be." And I'm like, "Okay."
That with the lower profile Twitter heckler, you quote him as saying, You showed me something within myself, or that you brought something out within himself that he didn't like. And I wonder, reading especially the new book, I got to thinking 2 things about your perspective. Number one, that you can read this book and think Marc Maron has had so many problems in life that this is interesting because his problems have been extreme. I can't relate to them maybe, but that's fascinating. Number 2, wait, I can relate to all his problems at once. You're totally relatable and unrelatable, both in interesting ways. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it makes very good sense. I mean, look, my problems are not extreme. My struggles were, primarily emotional. I wasn't beaten. I wasn't sexually abused. I don't have cancer. I didn't grow up in a country with nothing. I was never imprisoned. I mean, I had, sort of, kind of garden variety drug problems. And, and I was poorly parented, and I chose a profession that, is a very crazy thing. And I have problems with relationships because of these things, emotional issues. But no, I think that what you're saying is that how can I be so specific in terms of drawing from the life I live, which is very specific, yet still kind of resonate? It's because I think that a certain type of person that is not, I don't know if it's a majority of people, and I don't know that I need that, but I think there are people that are like-minded, that there's a sensitivity and a feeling of isolation and aggravation and a feeling of being gypped or a feeling of frustration that, more people don't pay attention to you, or that you're not realizing your creative potential. And the issues that I have are common with a certain type of person. But, and that type of person is not the type of person that would say, "Quit whining. Come on, man up."
Yes.
I'm not that guy. I'm the other guy. Like, I'm the guy that's sort of like, I don't know, I don't feel comfortable. I got problems, and this seems wrong, and you know what I mean? It's like, can we talk about them?
You do try to get to the core of your own motivations, and I wonder if you follow. There's a rule I've heard about personal storytelling, which is that reveal all about yourself, sure, but when it comes to the actions of somebody else in your stories, never speculate on their motivations. Report only their actions. Seems like you adhere to that. Do you think you do?
Yeah, because it's tricky. Because specifically with my father, and I think my ex-wives, there's the argument. Like, I talked to David Sedaris the other day, and he said, I asked him about how he represents his family, and he said he would never do anything that would embarrass them. And I don't know that I adhere to that, because I didn't, because, my father and I aren't speaking now because of this. But I knew that would be
book.
And the show. But I knew that would be a risk. But, yet the reason why we're not speaking, the things that, he's upset about me in terms of what I revealed about him, were essential in, creating the person that I am, for better and for worse, but mostly for worse. So how is that not part of my story? But in terms of speculating actions, yeah, I mean, I think that the story about the one, my grandfather's mouth, I could not even begin to fathom why, what happened in that story happened. But yet that mystery was in and of itself provocative. I do think that when I talk about what other people might have been thinking, or it's usually about like what his actions did to me. Do you know what I mean? And if I do speculate, it's usually for comedic effect.
Right. And in the book, he almost appears as your father appears like this is the core of one bad part of my personality, the attention demanding core, the crazy core, almost like he's not a person, but a representation of what you don't want to be.
Well, isn't that all of us with their fathers usually, unless they're good? I mean, after a certain age, you can't expect anything different from them, but you can, seek some justice within yourself about, whatever emotional injustice was, reaped upon you, and at a time where, you couldn't fight your own fight. So, I in the book, I think, I pay a little lip service to the fact that, the good things about him is that, he has a sort of energy and charisma and, a lot of fight in him, and, and he's very engaged. But the downside of that was, sort of pathological narcissism and selfishness and, emotionally abusive, behavior, was, that's the other side of that coin. And those things, really have crippled me. So, I'm not necessarily blaming him, but I think people say that as a disclaimer. I don't know that it's wrong to blame your parents. I think that, after a certain age, you're going to have to just accept it and take responsibility for whatever you've got to fix. But the depth of that rage, once you identify it, or that sadness of being shortchanged like that emotionally, or literally obliterated emotionally by your parents' needs or irresponsibility, is really, it has to be a fairly, large part of the engine of most people. I mean, if you were fortunate enough to have, emotionally responsible and decent parents, then, good for you. You may be the majority, but I doubt it. There's a sort of some kind of reconciling you're going to have to do within yourself to kind of let them off the hook. And I think that this was somewhat of an act of that. But, and also an act of just saying, like if you're not going to be honest, if you're going to present yourself to the world, I'm speaking to my father in this way, yet those of us who are directly emotionally connected to you had to suffer all this other crap. I mean, it's almost sort of like, you want to break through the lie and kind of put it in their face, because most people who are abusive or aggravated or nuts, they just don't see themselves that way. Right. Or if they do, they're sort of like, yeah, but that was yesterday.
Crazy people don't know.
Right. Well, they know, but they're sort of like, why are you getting worked up? I'm not worked up about that anymore.
It's last week.
Exactly.
Can you ever fall back on they did the best they could, or do you know they didn't do the best they could?
Well, no, I'm a real proponent of not accepting that.
Right.
I mean, because it's a cop-out.
Right.
I think that where contrition is necessary, it should be offered. That that is sort of the fallout of being emotionally hobbled by whatever they did or didn't do. You get to a certain point where you want to bring that up with them, usually when you're old enough to handle what's going to come back at you. And you say, look, I got these problems, and they're clearly because of this. And they're like, well, we did the best we could. And then you really got to say, like, did you? I mean, let's be honest. You didn't have any clue. You winged it. You did what you had to do. But I don't know that you did put much thought into it. I don't know that if and that might be an individual problem. But I think that is one of the larger cultural cop-outs of, of parents in general.
Thinking to your own stories on yourself, stories about yourself, are you ever tempted to arrive at the conclusion, I did the best I could?
Well, I think we do what we do in order to get by. That, you pick a series of habits or things you find, whether you find these weird cycles of behavior that function. And it's not until you realize that you've done damage to yourself or to others, and some people never realize it. They never realize, like I keep doing this same, I'm walking around this same block and I don't know why now I'm alone, or like why everyone's moved out of the block.
I'm doing the same thing I always have.
Yeah. What's wrong with everybody else?
Oh, yes.
So, but that's a good question, is that, did I do the best I could with what I had? So then if you phrase it like that, okay, I did the best I could with what I had. So your parents said did the best. We did the best we could with what we had. But is there still not some onus on, well, how could you not know that it's not right to do that? Did you look at other parents? Did you do, but yeah, I mean, when I was really screwed up and having a lot of trouble, that, it's stubbornness and it's pride. And these are, it's weird. I'm not a religious person and certainly not of this ilk, but, you really look, if you look at the 7 deadly sins, that's an interesting list.
Yes.
And the reason, it's very specific. But someone said like these things, we all got them, but if you let them, any one of them, or all of them, or 3 of them, or 2 of them, if any of them sort of get out of your, if they start to take on their own life, things are going to go down. Things are going to start to crumble. And, it's not a bad template. Pride is a very difficult bit of business in terms of how it becomes malignant to yourself and others. So, yeah, you can say your best. I did the best I could at that time. Well, how much of that is pride talking?
Finally, we alluded to the bleakest point you reached when you began, WTF.
Yeah.
Now, I've mentioned the Marc Maron Renaissance. Somebody asked David Bowie in the 70s, what does it feel like to be such a success? He said, success feels like sitting in the passenger seat of a fast car. The driver is pressing down on the accelerator. You don't know whether you like it or not, but the car is going faster and you're not driving. Is that success? Is that what it feels like? What's success feel like?
Well, no, I can see that, but obviously, I'm nothing compared to David Bowie. But my experience is that eventually, the guy's going to pull the car over and get out, and then you're going to be sitting there going like, is anyone going to drive this?
You're not going to move over. You're just waiting for the next driver.
I guess, you left the keys in, but I don't even know what road we're supposed to take anymore. So there's always that possibility that the driver will pull over and not leave you with a map.
Right, but he could run into a wall too, as you well know.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm very busy, and my life hasn't changed dramatically other than I'm here talking to you. I really, for me, like, I'm still at home. I'm still, my house is messy. I need to clean my garage. I got to do an interview tomorrow.
Yes.
I got to do some stand up. I got to write some new stand up. But I'm happy to be relevant to the people that I'm relevant to, because I've worked very hard to put myself out there and to have it resonate. And the way it's resonating with people is above and beyond what I could have expected. I'm not some sort of huge comic, or, I'm not selling out Radio City or anything like that. But the type of response that comes from the conversations I've had and the stand-up I've done or the book I've written, the type of emails I get from people saying like, you really got me through a bad time, or you helped me out, or I never thought about it like that. And, you really, I got an email about this book recently, specifically about the porn stuff and the Viagra stuff in there, of a guy that was like, I just never really framed it like that. And I've got work to do. Right. So in that way that, these kind of, this type of effect that I'm having on people in these very unique ways is very gratifying. So, that is a real success to me. I don't know whether the TV show is going to be picked up, or whether people are going to buy the book or any of that. That's, those are out of my control, and also, those are decisions based on commerce. But ultimately, as an artist or as a performer, or as whatever the hell it is I am, and certainly at my age, okay, so we've got this wave going. It's like, well, I don't need it. I don't mind if the car slows down as long as I'm still in the car. So if we could, I'd like to keep working, and I'd like to not die broke, and, sure. And I'd like to have health insurance.
Right.
I'd like to, those are the practical things.
And if the occasional Twitter heckler comes along, so be it.
Yeah, but that guy can bring you down. You got to be careful. You're only one tweet away from, completely destroying yourself.
A sober lesson from Marc Maron, comedian, podcaster, writer. The new book is Attempting Normal. The second book, by the way. Pick up his first one as well. And the television show is Maron on the Independent Film Channel. The podcast is WTF. Marc, thanks so much for sitting down.
Great talk. Thank you.
This has been the Los Angeles Review of Books podcast. I've been Colin Marshall. Find much more at lareviewofbooks.org. Thanks.